Welcome back. My apologies, I was a bit late because I was in Ankara actually for some meetings. And if you permit me, let me just share a very small anecdote with you. Unfortunately, we journalists, we live by the day. So, and unfortunately, sometimes we're not very good at, follow-ups. But when there was this change of presidency in Cyprus, I've called some of my friends in the Turkish part, and I was asking, listen, I'm doing interviews for my newspapers, and I have already interviewed the ones I know as, Cyprus experts. I have already interviewed Sylvia, etc. So I'm looking for new names, etc. And the answer was, Barçın, I really cannot tell you any name because no one in Turkey is sort of, not even any academic is sort of left. Anyway, so I didn't give up. I called a journalist friend of mine in Ankara, and I said, listen, I'm coming to Ankara, and I'd like to perhaps find someone, doing research on Cyprus. And so, we were, brainstorming together, who is in Middle East Technical University. And I said, who is in Bilkent International Relations? And the answer was, there, it's occupied by the Greek academics. So my understanding is that before I was here, somebody, I think you have mentioned that one of the result of the rapprochement was the presence of Greek scholars in Turkey. I personally am extremely happy about that. Therefore, following this anecdote, let's kick off the conversation by the comments that were presented by especially Professor Mustafa Aydin and Soli Özel, which they sort of give me a small summary. If you would like to answer them or make a point, let's have your initial follow-up remarks and then open the floor for discussion. And I would also have some questions because I have taken a look at some of the findings. And let's kick off like that, okay? All right, Dimitri?
Thanks, Barçın. Well, it's been very interesting to listen to my colleagues, not just my Turkish colleagues and Slovak colleague and Greek colleague as well, regarding their perceptions of Greek-Turkish relations and especially the link to the EU. There are two or three things that have come to mind as I was listening to them. And maybe we need to, one of the things, many that we do, but maybe we should sit down as scholars and look at the whole concept of rapprochement and how it applies. I take Ambassador Volkan's point that it's not rapprochement. We call it rapprochement because we feel it's that process, but how does it apply to both cases and what we need to do? And adding on to this is something that Mustafa Aydin mentioned, which is the fact that it's true. Our governments do nothing to support this. There might be bilaterally between TÜBİTAK and the Greek counterpart of TÜBİTAK scholarships, but these are bilateral, they exist anyway, but nothing to support it. The same way if one looks at rapprochement and the Franco-German case, which keeps being generation after generation, you build upon it. So maybe this is even a paper, an interesting paper, or policy and academic in that sense, with ideas as to how to, whether what we are doing is actually rapprochement, where it is and how we could sustain it even more. The other point which is interesting had to do with Mustafa Aydin when he mentioned about the perceived lack of diversity, but it's not perceived, it's real, lack of diversity among Greek elites, especially Greek academics and others, elites. When it comes to Turkey, the fact that it's the readiness to adopt positions that are the official positions, as opposed to Turkish elite. Obviously, this perception applies from the Greek side as well, right? It is true, though, my 5 years or so that I've been here, that one can hear different perspectives as well. It depends on the context. It depends on the context, and I think It has a lot to do with whether one speaks publicly or not and in what context. But it is interesting. And I was telling Mustafa earlier, maybe that's how I feel like an outlier at times in my own country, or maybe some of us do feel here, the Greeks here, when we want to raise certain issues that we're not sure that they would be accepted, because and I think the feeling of falling back into what the official positions are, well, has to do maybe with a certain sense of inferiority complex. We're still dealing with a much bigger neighbor. The threat perception is out there. It's still prevailing, right, in terms of what is the biggest issue when it comes to Greek foreign policy and so on. And this has an impact on the elites and society at large. But I think it's a fascinating point. Now, we presented results, and that's what I presented. We can interpret them in many ways. And I think what has come out in the discussion, it's, you know, we are somewhere on a ship, neither good nor bad, sometimes stormy waters, sometimes calm waters. But the real danger that this is not ultimately, and I think Kostas was challenged on this about the idea of institutionalization of the relationship, that it's not necessarily institutionalized, or whether the fact that we've had 59 rounds of proximity talks, whether that's institutionalization enough, just because we've been through a period of 16 years or so of relative peace, which is an exception to the rule in Greek-Turkish relations. Is that enough to sustain it? On the other hand, I always, I'm reminded of a story. I always tell this story. It has to do with my second time that I came to Turkey. First time I came in 2002. Second time I was in Paris at the time. I came in 2003. And I was invited by, Ron Asmus for a meeting, GMF meeting here. And I was working at the EU Institute for Security Studies in Paris. And I was invited to come together with a Spanish colleague of mine, Martin. And before we leave Paris to come here, Martin comes to my office and he goes, Dimitri, you are the expert. Do we need a visa to come to Turkey? And I go, Martin, I don't need one, but you check, I think you might need one. If you don't need one, I don't need one. You could not conceive the fact that the Greek might not need a visa and the Spaniard might need it. I said, Martin, I told you, whatever. We land, we go to passport control. I let Martin go first. Martin is told, go get your visa. Shock for Martin. I said, I'll wait for you, first shock. So we go through passport control. If I remember, the setup was still a bit different. It was Ataturk Airport, but the setup was a bit different. And as we pass passport control, there's a pole and there's a banner and a Greek and a Turkish flag together. At the time, Greece and Turkey were bidding for the European Championship together. Martin was shocked, second shock. And he turns to me, you guys, you Greeks, Turks, have been joking with us all these years. That was his gut reaction, right? My academic colleague, what is going on? And of course, the perception is that, that we never talked. Of course, we have been talking at certain levels of society. But after listening to this round, and every time we talk about Greek-Turkish relations, makes you wonder whether talk is enough. And this, I think, is the crux of what's coming out here. Just like the fact that what's becoming unraveled is policy, and I mentioned it before. My Turkish colleagues said you should not base Greek-Turkish relations on the European perspective. But that has been Athens' policy for a while, right? 99, 2003, all these important dates are predicated upon a sea change in Greek perceptions about Turkey, and the European perspective plays a key role. And it's about acquiring norms and values, which are the same, and same rules of the game, and these might have a positive impact on Greek-Turkish relations. And I think we've come to a point right now where this might be unraveling. That's why I talked about glue or anchor or whatever. And I think this is the key issue, because it's unraveling in Greeks proper, and that's still out there. This is a big concern. This is a big concern. And it's just something to keep in mind. The last thing is, yes, we need to do more than just talk. I mean, again, Mustafa Aydin said, some of us in this room, members of the Greek-Turkish Forum, and even that which we keep talking without really doing much, but we keep talking, even that which was financed silently by the foreign ministries of both countries and has been for the last 15 years or so, even that financing has stopped. And no new mechanism has emerged from either side to say, let's keep some sort of dialogue going with others. So what can we do? And I think the focus is, I mean, this is where Sylvia, she talked about education, school books, yes, long-term process. It's being tried, and not just in the Greek-Turkish context, the Cypriot context, the Balkan context. It's a long-term process and absolutely necessary, where you realize that ultimately academics, scientists sit together and they can come to some sort of model textbook, and then you get challenged by your ministers of education and the likes, and nothing ever happens. Even the fact that you actually sat down and came up with a common history that's acceptable is significant enough. But the next step might actually be to focus on the younger generations through our means. And I think this is something that we are talking here a lot at Kadir Has about how to continue this. And this is, you know, through maybe this pessimism or realism, this is what we can do to keep a process which is not in the spotlight. We heard what you were saying before, Barchin, we heard in the morning too. It's not important. Nobody seems to care in our respective countries. Imagine the rest of the world, right? Our relations. And therefore, if we do care, what can we do? And this is what we've been talking about, and I think this is something that we'll be working on to try to jumpstart the process, or not jumpstart it. What is happening, make sure younger generations understand that it takes work to keep the dialogue open. It takes work to be able to come without a visa anytime you want from Greece here, and it takes work for the fact that Turks can go to the islands without a visa, or it's relatively easy for them to get a visa to go to Greece. That takes work. It should not be taken for granted. And so how do you build upon that so that at some future stage there might be a small breakthrough at least? Thank you.
Add one anecdote that I recalled when you were talking about the difference between Turkish and Greek academics. You know, their approach to I can judge that sometimes from their approach to journalists. And I was once in Athens, and I had interviewed someone from, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall well, someone from Ediamep, and it was already rapprochement, peak of the relations, etc. There wasn't big apparent issues, and usually I don't accept to send back the text, you know, because my interviews are Q&A, you know. I don't play with the words. I just say whatever they say. And the only exception, you know, among all those people that I have interviewed, you know, the Greek scholar, you know, made sure that he would like to see the text, you know. And I realized that some of the changes he made where, and you know, he sort of explained that it could, you know, be misunderstood by the public, etc., etc. So I was a bit, I was like, you know, there's still this, you know, careful attitude on the part of the Greek scholars. But of course, there was only one example, so I don't perhaps want to generalize on that, but it sort of had striken me that because I had interviewed politicians, etc., they never asked back the text, but there was a specific sensitivity. That's why I was a little bit surprised, you know.
What was the percentage of mistrust?
11%, yes. Perhaps he didn't trust because I was a Turkish journalist. Anyway, Kostas.
Actually, no. I mean, I feel the urge to clarify a couple of things that I have said, like the issue about institutionalization. Of course, it's an academic term, and it has a special meaning. It doesn't mean that we've got institutions, that structures, but it means also a process. And I think what we have been doing since the early 2000s is exactly that. And I insist, you know, you've got ministers come and go, and not in the headlines, it's not news anymore. Okay, Prime Minister would come to Turkey, it gets the headline for a day. Like now, the foreign minister is coming, and it's not a big deal anymore. I think this, if we look at, you know, the academic literature, this is some sort of institutionalization of a bilateral relationship, or at least it's a solid process. Now, 16 years, it's an exception to the rule. Okay, yes, it is an exception to the rule, but it is a major exception. Does it set a trend? I think the more we enjoy what I call the peaceful coexistence, even without touching on the hot issues like delimitation or whatever, you know, it produces, the output is an acquis that it will get harder, not impossible, but harder to unravel at the end. Now, and we need this time, because in order to transform a zero-sum adversarial relationship to a win-win situation, or to put it again in boring academic terms, from relative gains to absolute gains, we need time. We need time. Can we do more in between? Of course we can do more in between. But if you look at what is going on between Greece and Turkey in the last 16 years, then you realize that what is left to be done is to engage the issues directly. Are we ready to do that? I don't think we are ready to do that, and we are not ready to do that because of the dire financial situation in Greece, that nobody has the confidence to come up with a roadmap, a concrete roadmap towards tackling the major issues, and because of what is also perceived in Greece as the growing or the widening of the asymmetrical power relationship between the two. I mean, my reading of history is that you get breakthroughs either when one country is defeated, like Germany, semi-independent for many years, and that gives you the time. And also, Germans, they had their own guilds to deal with, so it was easier. But it took time, and it took also 1 million American troops stationed in Germany. We don't have that between Greece and Turkey. We don't have the structure, the equivalent structural factor that was the European integration in the case of Franco-German reconciliation. We don't have that structure, so we have to be we have to deal with what we have, and I would not underestimate. Now imagine, most of you might know that Mustafa Aydin and I co-edited a book a few years back, 2004, actually, on Greek-Turkish relations, that was published in Britain, and it was the first time that such a project took place. And it's still a classic. It's very relevant. You read it and you know what is going on after 10 years. But the atmosphere, it is very different. So I'm because I'm a political realist, I should be more pessimistic, but I'm not. The more the Aegean waters remain calm, the more we can work it out at the end.
Thank you very much. Before opening the floor for discussion, would you mind if I sort of perhaps add a few points from my perspective as a journalist, and perhaps a little bit challenge those who've been, perhaps a bit pessimist, and maybe you can challenge my then probably optimism. But, correct me if I'm wrong, but, what Turkey had said before the rapprochement, or whatever we call reconciliation, had started was this: okay, we have serious problems, but let's not have these serious problems prevent our human-to-human, people-to-people, society-to-society relations. Whereas the Greek side used to say, wait a minute, I can't talk economy or culture to you as if, and ignore the fact that you are threatening me in the Aegean. But, following, the Öcalan case and the earthquake, etc., this, I would say this Greek attitude has changed, and therefore, what really needs in order to, substantiate relations between the two countries have started, people-to-people relations. And I think one of the areas where we see this tremendously a lot, and that's why I'm saying maybe you would find me a bit too optimistic on that, it's tourism. Again, I have to share my anecdotes. The first time there was an election where the tourism minister, Kefalogiannis, she became the tourism minister, and I was going to Athens for a conference, and I asked to have an interview with her, and I have to admit that my link was very good, but she accepted it. And when I started the interview, she said, first of all, you have good linkages, I accept, but she said, you are the first journalist I give an interview because we didn't even get a vote of confidence. Now, I don't think this was because of me or because of my the link I have used. It was also indicative of the willingness on the part of the Greek tourism minister to address the Turkish audience. So I thought it was an important thing that she accepted to give an interview first to a Turkish journalist and after to Greek journalists, even before there was a vote of confidence in the government. That's one. The second thing is, not when we say not much is being done. Again, on the tourism, I understand that on Turkey, the Turkish side is trying to restore some of the Greek churches, and on the Greek side, despite the dire circumstances, there is an effort, my understanding, to sort of make the restoration of certain mosques, especially in the tourism areas. And again, I mean, there is this flock of Turkish tourists to Greece, and I, when you remember in 15 years ago, I mean, you couldn't even, I mean, when I would be, very positive about Turkish-Greek relations, Turkish diplomats used to tell me, God, you journalists, you're so, optimist, you don't know the realities, you go to Greece and you cannot even have a Turkish flag. Normally, in hotels, when there's a Turkish visitor, let's say, you're supposed to have a flag. You can't even have a flag in Greece, etc. They're too nationalistic, etc. Now you go to the islands, and you have, these plates in Turkish saying you can find Turkish breakfast here. People, no, even that they have become even flexible, and to me that was unimaginable. People speaking in Turkish, etc., etc. So I think, and again, as a journalist, one of the areas which I get a lot of complaint, it's the visas. Turks are complaining tremendously about visas. And I couldn't imagine that my answer would be, go to the Greeks. They give it very easily, and ironic that the French as well nowadays are quite good too. But, I wouldn't imagine myself saying, go to the Greeks, prefer the Greeks, to get a visa. So that's why I was sort of thinking that maybe this time the people are ahead, perhaps, of the elites. But another and final point that I'd like to make again on my trip to Athens, I've realized something, that we here in Turkey, I'm not sure to what degree we were aware of the acuteness and the deepness of the economic crisis, honestly. I felt it when I went there. I mean, reading and hearing is something, but, going and seeing it is another thing. So when we're talking about the fact that the governments perhaps are not doing much, perhaps we have to give a bit of credit to the fact that, the Greek governments, are sort of dealing with a huge fire. And this, fire, in the sense that it's such a deep economic crisis, internal issues, that perhaps it's only natural that they perhaps might not have the energy, etc., to perhaps to deal with the Turkish issue as much as we might think. Having said that, let me, I would welcome anyone to obviously, answer back if you have any thoughts on me. But before, let me have a question from there, please, and a question from there. Bir gidelim şimdilik. Let's go one and one, unless it will be a follow-up. Okay? Buyurun. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It's working? Huh? Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Maria Varaki. For those who are not from Kadir Has University, I'm also Greek, and I'm teaching international law here at the law faculty. And I'm together with Dimitris and Kostas. I'm the other example proof, of the Rapprochement, together with another academic from Greece sitting next to me. Actually, I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I very much agree with your last comment about tourism, because I come from northern Greece. I'm from Kavala. So I live between Kavala and Selanik, and I can tell you the last years, every single weekend, it's impossible to park in Selanik or in Kavala. You cannot find a parking spot because every car table is 34. It's 34, which is fantastic. Common people are grateful to Turkish people for coming because they managed to revive the economy, at least of northern Greece. So I don't know who is the elite. That was my question to Dimitris during the coffee break, how you define the elite. And generally, the elite is very conservative. We are outsiders, we are outsiders. And generally, what is called elite is conservative, and they take the official position. But I totally agree with your comment that common people are far ahead of that, Call it practical purposes, the financial crisis, the refugee feeling, of people coming from Turkey and they're looking for the places of the great-grandfathers, in Greece. There is something which is fantastic and very different. My question is addressed to the whole panel. The ambassador before talked about the forthcoming elections here in Turkey, and we had elections, as all of you know, in Greece. And foreign policy was totally missing from the campaign. And the next day, after the establishment of the new cabinet, we woke up and we were shocked, at least the majority, at least some of us who are in this room, because we ended up with an extra nationalist minister of defense to the extent of psychiatric help, Kamenos, and also with an extremely infamous minister of foreign affairs, infamous about his writings with regard to communist Poland. And yesterday, this minister invited in the first Council of Foreign Affairs Golden Dawn to participate and to be, in these meetings in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So my question is to all the panel about this extreme nationalism that comes from the new cabinet increase, and nationalism that also is very much relevant in the Turkey. To what extent you see that we can have a problem? To what extent that is going to affect further relations? Thank you.
Sorry. Okay, let's have 3 minutes of answers and go on with the rest of the questions.
Very quickly, because the tourism question keeps coming up, and I keep thinking, Greece is also a popular destination for German tourists and others, and if you ask German public opinion what they think of Greece right now, the very tourists that have gone to Greece, I think it's very low. So I am not sure. I mean, this is one indicator, the people-to-people contacts, but I don't think it's enough. Obviously, what joins us is the neighborhood, but it's good that that feeling is there, but it could change overnight. This is just my first comment, both listening to you and Maria's comment, So the nationalism, I think it's something that also Ambassador Vulcan raised. It's there. It's rare because, our histories are so tied in that what we consider a catastrophe is considered a victory by Turkey and vice versa, different times throughout history, and we have not really managed to overcome that. And I think nationalism, populism are something where I would rather have here the elites. Mustafa before also talked about the fact that he thinks the public is ahead of the elites. But in this case, based on at least on our survey results, I would rather have these elites be in charge of the process than public opinion at this stage, which I think is more malleable to nationalism, more malleable to populism because of the crisis. I could be wrong, but this is my gut reaction. I think, Kostas, you might want also to answer the question about how we pick the elites. And Sylvia, maybe. Yeah.
But we tried to focus on the leading members of the elite. For example, military elites from the colonel and lieutenant general upwards, and directors of specific directorates. Same thing with the foreign ministry. So it's as I said, leading members of the elite. Yes, you can see the methodology if you have time and you are not bored with these things, academic methodologies. You can look at it in the relevant site.
Two things. About the first, I share with Dimitris kind of a healthy skepticism about people-to-people connection. A few years back, quite a few years back, with a friend of mine, we wrote an article about Turkey's relations with Syria, Iraq, and Iran in the Middle East, and we called the relations patrimonial. And we argued that even though people-to-people relations were developing at the time, it's the state who decides how much it develops or not. I fear the same thing between Greece and Turkey. We are talking here tourists who are coming here or going there, but they are allowed to do so by the governments with their relaxed visa regimes. I don't see people taking up streets if the government suddenly decides to revoke the visa regimes. You know, if suddenly Turkey decides to put visa on Greek citizens, I don't see Turkish citizens taking the streets against Turkish governments, like, oh, no, don't do it. And the same in Greece. So this is happening because of the governments wants this to happen. And in this country and in Greece, the governments are very important, still are very important, unfortunately. And that's why I'm all for people-to-people connection, but that's why I'm saying that we have to tend to it. We have to continuously support to it. As Dimitri said in his previous remarks, he gave an example of France and Germany still doing, after all these years, they're still doing projects and supporting and etc. During the break, I told a few people, Turkey, every year, there is a project in Turkey. We gave, Turkey's government gives scholarships to thousands of people around the world, so-called Turkic and friendly nations. Why not Greece being a friendly nation? We can, let's imagine Turkish government giving 1,000 scholarship every year to Greek university students to come and study in Turkey, and same from the Greek government. In 5 years' time, you have 10,000 persons, right? Spending time, quality time, not as a tourist a week. You go there, you eat, you drink, it's nice, and come back. It doesn't change your perceptions too much. But 10,000 people in 5 years, having spent more than a year in the opposite country, and think about their families. So it's 50,000 people. It's very important. So these are small projects, actually, could be implemented, but the government should do it. And they're not doing it. That's my criticism. Second point, something came to my mind. When Turkish-Greek rapprochement started, out of a crisis of Öcalan affair, actually, it started because Turkey at the time, or the foreign minister most probably at the time, chose not to exploit the situation against Greece. And a few days ago, a Greek told me also similar thing. He said, now Turkey is not exploiting the fact that Greece is weak, on his knees, that was his words actually, economically. So I think this is also important aspect. By not doing something, sometimes you are doing lots of things. And I think that's, I wanted to get that out here also. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Actually, I was once visiting NATO headquarters, and the Turkish diplomat who was escorting me, he just talked in Turkish to a group of diplomats, and I said, who are they? He said, they're Albanians. I said, how come they speak Turkish? He said, well, they're the F-type, And I was, F-type meaning these were Albanians raised in Fethullah Gülen schools, and they have come to such a stage that they have become diplomats for the Albania's NATO delegation. I was very surprised and impressed, actually, and that was the time when, you could still have positive talk about the schools. But anyway, just in 3 minutes, Sylvia, any reflection on perhaps Cyprus elites versus public opinion in 3 minutes only, if you can?
I guess there will be some other questions about Cyprus. We were talking about the property and also about the education. But what I was thinking about was that my remarks about the education in context of what Maria and Dimitri said might have looked a bit naive. Of course, I know that the curricula and the changes in syllabuses have been tried in both respective countries, and it did not work in Cyprus, in my view, because it was done unilaterally only by Turkish Cypriots, not by Greek Cypriots. That's why I think that it should be done always bilaterally. But at the same time, I don't think we should give up. I don't say that it's an easy project or it's an easy thing to do, but I can't imagine doing without that, even a small step in this direction is, I'm biased. Of course, I'm biased by my profession. I believe in education, and the trust, what you mentioned, the issue of trust, is not based on empirical, it's not empirical, right? Because I talked to, for instance, a friend of mine, she's running a hotel in just across the borders, and she told me that actually the most trustable tourists she's getting or she's having are Turks. So that percentage of trust, what you get, the low percentage, is not based on empirical evidence. It's obviously something what has been taught and learned, right? So if we don't try to change it, then I think that we are at the loss, and then the whole rapprochement is going to stay as an elitist project. And basically, that's it.
Madam Chair, my name is Serhat Güvenç. I teach international relations here. I used to earn half of my bread by teaching or talking about Turkish-Greek problems, and the other half used to come from teaching about the European integration. Now, I'm teaching on other subjects. It was very popular back then. So, and my classes were always popular, both European integration and Turkish-Greek disputes classes were always popular. These days, unfortunately, I have difficulty, recruiting students. And that brings me to an interesting conclusion that the mindset among the young generation is totally different today. The university students, just think of this particular campus. We have students, IR majors, whose department chair is a Greek of Greece, not a Rum of Istanbul. That is the difference. So they have been socializing with them. They are learning to solve their daily problems with the help of a Greek professor. Therefore, it will be very difficult to convince this young generation to fall back on the old position. Yes, Professor Aydin is right. The government holds the key, but the stakes are higher compared to 10 years ago, when they decide, to rupture the relations overnight. I mean, the consequences would be felt on the government, and this was not possible. That was not possible 10 years ago. Also, I'm an academic, and I'm also an NGO administrator. I am the board member of Lozan Mübadilleri Vakfı, Lausanne Treaty Immigrants Foundation, and we used to depend EU funding for survival. EU stopped funding our projects because Turkish-Greek rapprochement at social level is a done deal for the EU. Believe it or not, I mean, they are reluctant to underwrite anything that is about, building social bridges between the two people. And a personal experience, I mean, and some of the people sitting on this panel were instrumental in that. Last year I attended a seminar organized by Greek General Staff, right, or was Ministry of Defense. And, I was involved all sorts of activities, academic and track 2 activities, but never, even in my wildest dreams, that I would be greeted at the airport by a Greek Army aviator lieutenant. And I was given a ride in an official Greek Air Force car to the venue of the conference. So, I mean, such things were impossible. And I'm an optimist. I'm a pessimist, and I'm a political realist like Kostas. And a pessimist is an optimist realist, to quote another Greek colleague of ours, Harry Mitras, indeed, I mean. So I see reasons to remain optimistic, but the problem is lack of institutionalization. Is the relationship on a sustainable track is a different issue. But definitely, especially in terms of generations, we're dealing with a new generation, and they are not used to hearing or talking about Turkish-Greek problems. Even dogfights over the Aegean are no longer interesting. They're not no longer interesting. Well, Syria offers more interesting stories in that respect. Thank you.
I wanted to the confidence building measure probably doesn't make sense right now, but I think it's interesting to think about why it's always come up. And the reason that Greek Cypriots have been so insistent on Varoshu is because they haven't been able to see anything else forthcoming. So I think now that Akıncı is presenting a very different spirit and is fully committed to carrying the talks to their conclusion very quickly, at least in his statements, I think that itself has given the Greek Cypriots a bit more confidence that probably that main track can continue. So I agree that focusing on the key issues within the settlement talks itself is probably to be prioritized right now. But one thing that Turkey can do very quickly, because it will be a sticking point, is on property. Because the compensation regime and plus the territorial adjustments plus the right to return are all going to be bundled up in this. And since there is a mechanism already existing in Cyprus established by Turkey, it condemned the Immovable Property Commission, the IPC. What Turkey could do very quickly is to actually fulfill its obligations towards the Greek Cypriots, whose cases have been decided, have been agreed to, but haven't yet been paid in the last year and a half. So the money actually gets sent by Ankara for the compensation, but the Turkish Cypriot authorities, at least the rumor is, they use the funds to cover internal costs, to pay for farmer subsidies or public servant salaries. So I think that would be a very quick and easy win for Turkey to demonstrate that things are on track. So I wanted to bring that up. And of course, on the issue of education, I think it's already been mentioned, but in the context of Turkey and Greece, I think the overall question here is how do you deal with the perception of the other? How do you teach that within schools? So it's not only about sort of the interpretation of Greece or Greeks, but how do you deal with questions in Turkey about, our very complicated history, Armenians and Greeks. So it's bundled up in much wider issues. I'm really glad to hear that somebody mentioned the Rum community in Istanbul, because I think the other demonstration is that, and in these kinds of conversations, I would love to see in the future that we talk about Turkey's treatment of its own Greeks, because the question of minority schools, of Halki, for example, we really need to also focus on these here if we're ever going to have any kind of progress on the Greek-Turkish front. You know, these need to be looked at holistically. In terms of the wider sort of the Greek-Turkish, and you know, I feel a bit sort of responsible and guilty myself, having been part of the Greek-Turkish Forum meetings for so many years. So, and I really appreciate the suggestion and the novel idea that Mustafa Aydin put forward to develop this sort of scholarship scheme. What are other things that could be proposed or that could really help motivate either at the government level or let's say the municipal government level, because I think also so much of our focus is on what the national governments can do or what the foreign ministries can do, but is there an opportunity to strengthen ties amongst mayors and regional authorities or local authorities that could be very productive?
There's another one over there.
Hello, this is Minas Vasiliadis from Apogevmatini newspaper. Now, I won't say I don't agree with the title. I understand what you want to say with the title, but I find it wrong because it's like me saying, does the dialogue between the district of Van and Armenia bring them closer to Turkey? Anyway, now I want to thank Dr. Tiriaki, because she mentioned the educational part. I think that the indoctrination in the textbooks, the history textbooks, must cease to exist. I went to primary school in Greece back in the 80s when people who were supposed to teach 6 years old and 7 years old about their nation's history, they taught it in according to their own perspective and to their own hatred. This must end, because if we want to continue having these conversations and to have more people that invest in dialogue and want to organize such talks, they must first be taught history according to non-militarized history. Because it's impossible to convince an 18, 19-year-old youngster that what they told you when you were 6 or 7 didn't actually happen. And Germany and France did that in 2006. Of course, they were mature democracies. Maybe Greece and Turkey should focus on this. And the visa. And please, doctor, don't tell the liberals that I said this. There must be visa liberalization for the Turks, because if they don't see Europe, they will never understand what it is about. They must be able to go there and visit it as much as they can for touristic purposes or as businessmen. Of course, there are things that have to be done, and this is political, so it has to do with the government here as well. But the liberals are also they're reluctant to opening visa for the Turks at this moment. And if the Turks are not able to travel to Europe themselves, then they have to trust us, journalists. And unfortunately, hate speech in Europe is, in Turkey is at its best, especially in pre-electoral periods. Thank you.
Mihail Vasiliadis. Mümkün olursa Türkçe konuşacağım. Zannediyorum herkes anlar. İki taraf arasında bir anlaşma, bir yakınlaşma, samimi bir ilişki olabilmesi için zannediyorum ki bir denge olması şart. Bir güç dengesi, askeri yönde olsun, ekonomi yönünde olsun. iki tarafın içinde yaşayan azınlıklar konusunda olsun. Mesela şu anda Yunanistan'da bir Türk kökenli Müslüman azınlığı, burada artık Rum demeyeceğimiz, Rum diyeceğimiz, karetta gibi 600 ailenin kalmış olduğu bir azınlık. Bu iki azınlık arasında bir denge olmadıktan sonra bu iki tarafın samimi bir şekilde birbirine güvenmesinin pek mümkün olamayacağını zannediyorum. Devletler bu konuda lafta çok iştahlı ama hep bu sorunlara cevabı, daha doğrusu bu sorunlara çözümü bir çözüm sürecine bağlıyorlar. Şimdi işin içinde bir süreç oldu mu, bu süreci istediğiniz kadar uzatırsınız, istediğiniz kadar gevşetirsiniz ve hiçbir zamanda bitirmezsiniz. Eğer bir yakınlaşma olacaksa, yapılması gereken şeylerin hemen ve şimdi yapılması gerekir. Tabii şu anda iki taraf arasında denge sağlamak mümkün olmayan bir şey gibi görünüyor. Ama iki taraf arasında mümkün olmayan bu denge, bu iki tarafın içinde olacak daha geniş bir toplumun, bir kurumun içinde, Avrupa Birliği mi olur, NATO mu olur, başka bir şey mi olur? Ancak böyle bir geniş çerçevenin içinde belki bu güveni sağlayabiliriz. Bu karşılıklı itimadı yerine getirebiliriz. Benim buradaki görevim Apogevmatini gazetesinin editörü olarak 90 yıllık günlük bir Rumca gazeteyi çıkarabilmek. Artık bunun ne kadar yürüyebileceğini ben de bilmiyorum. Yakında bu da ortadan kalkıp gidecek, denge daha da bozulacak diye düşünüyorum.
Efendim, go ahead.
Sezin Markaya, European Union legal law expert. My question is actually very simple. Regarding the new government in Greece, do they have it on their agenda, actually, the Turkish-Greece relationships? Thank you.
Shall we have the answers and the closing remarks? All right, let's go like that, perhaps. Or from Sylvia, let's start from here. Let's go like that. Go ahead.
Okay, so one last remark about the education, because you will think that I'm nuts, that I got so obsessed. But one more. Because I'm looking at you and you are so blank, you know, such a poker face, like looking at me like, oh, no, what the hell. Anyway, anecdote. Marcin, yeah, I'm going to tell an anecdote as well. I don't think that, you know, I mean, small steps are possible. And one of such steps happened actually in the Republic of Cyprus when the Greek Cypriots changed the mathematic books in 2000, before the Annan Plan, actually, before the vote on Annan Plan, 2003, 2004. And they changed only a small part of it. It's an extreme, and you will not like the example, but it was the reality. I learned this from those days, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of KKTJ, TRNC. There was in primary school books, Greek Cypriots were trying to use in a school in Karpas. There was a mathematic case that, and now I don't remember the numbers, but the case was, you are fighting as a Greek Cypriot 574 Turkish Cypriots. And I don't know now how many have been killed. 200 of them have been killed. How many more should be killed? I don't really know whether it was how many of them you should kill or should be killed. It doesn't matter, you know. But basically when this book arrived to Turkish Cypriot territory, and it was supposed to be submitted as a curriculum in Karpas, in the Karpas school. It was checked actually by the Turkish Cypriot authorities, and then they found this case, and it was removed. You know, so what? I mean, of course, and thanks God. So I mean, small steps are possible because we even don't realize sometimes, or we can't even imagine what everything can be found in those books. And I went through both Turkish Cypriot books and Greek Cypriot books quite in details because of another project I have been part of. And yes, I mean, it's really sometimes surprising what is in it. The issue of property, I completely agree with you. Actually, when I started working on the Cyprus issue, it was in 2002, and I started working on Cyprus as a property expert. I was asked to analyze the property section of Annan Plan. It was Annan Plan 2, then 3, and then 5th. And then I analyzed the rest basically. Why issue of Varosha is so much on the agenda? Because it's just about the property and about the property prices. The highest prices for the properties, and you know it, are from Varosha because most of the buildings are hotels. So it's not only it's not only about restituting the properties. It's not only about getting the properties back in a way of restitutio in integrum, to getting them back. But what is actually freaking? It's the loss of use. And the loss of use is going to be calculated, as it was in Loisidus case. It's going to be calculated from the day of dispossession till the day of the restitution, if that's going to be the remedy, right? And now can you imagine Mr. Lordos, if he's going to get a couple of hotels in Varosha with all the loss of use? I mean, it's going to be quite lots of money if we think that Varosha would be the wonderful holiday resort all through those years, and what he could have done with that hadn't been the Turkish military being present there. So that's why Varosha. But overall, I agree that I completely agree with you that the Immovable Property Commission should be able to execute its own decisions in a proper way. Here, I don't know, and I have to admit that I don't know who is responsible for the money not being given to the writer's hands. So I don't know whether that can change with the new president in TRNC, or it is something what Ankara can somehow influence. The way or the other, again, I have to just support what you say. That would be a good way to start.
Couple of comments very briefly. One about minorities, both in Greece. My view and my conviction, actually, that this is an issue that cannot and should not, under any circumstances, be bilateralized. Because then nothing will move. If Greeks feel that they will do, or they are doing more about their citizens as they should have done because of Turkish pressure, then this is their things are not moving that way. Anyway, the second point is about Cyprus. It's a more general point, Cyprus solution, and I think what is important for my Turkish friends to take a note of is that the Athens has a very minor role to play, a minuscule role to play in the eventual resolution of the Cyprus problem. And I mean, there was a big debate in Greece, a bloody debate that led to the coup against Makarios in '74, and but this is not an issue anymore. It's up to the Greek Cypriots to decide. And if the perception in Turkey is that Athens can put pressure on Nicosia, or that they can set the agenda, this is wrong. This is wrong. Athens will support most of the time every decision the Greek Cypriots will do. Whether this is good or not, I don't know, but that's the reality. My third and final point is about books, and it's an anecdote, because we've been saying, I've got 2 daughters, and I can tell you that their history books, both elementary school and high school, had nothing to do with what the books were during my time. Nothing at all. The thing is that sometimes we overshoot. For example, there was an excellent book, 6th grade, elementary school, excellent book. And there was just one thing. The writers, the authors, had describing what happened in Izmir in 1922. Okay, they wrote that many Greeks died because of the conjunction or whatever, the high concentration of people in the port. Because, and the result of that is that some ultranationalists picked it up, they made it a big deal, they exerted enormous pressure on the following Minister of Education, and the book was withdrawn.
This is recent also. This is very recent.
Yes, and it was just in 2000 and, no, it's more than that. It's more than that, yeah. It was 2000, I think 2006, 2007. No, it was 2000. It happened in 2006. The Minister of Education, Marietta Giannakou, stood her ground. She did not get re-elected. And her successor, he didn't want to play with it, so he withdrew the book. Just for that stupid thing. Because it was an excellent book, and you didn't have to overshoot. There was you could say there was a war, there was this, and people died. Thank you.
Okay, I'll say a few words about Varosha. Why it comes? I think it's very simple from a realistic perception. It comes because even the Turkish army said that we took Varosha just to give it back in negotiations. So that's the obvious place to start. That's why the Greeks always ask, why don't you give it back since you took it to give? And the Turks start there because nobody lives there, so it's easy to give it, right? It's not owned by the Turks emotionally, psychologically, and materially. So that's why it starts from there. The problem, I think the problem around Varosha also is the same problem for the whole Cyprus issue. The Greek position so far in Varosha, or regarding Varosha, has been, why don't you give it as a part of a CBM? Not as a part of a negotiated agreement. And the Turkish position was always, okay, if I'm gonna give it to something to you, why don't you give me something? So this is quid pro quo. This has been the main problem. And I think it's the same for all the questions in Cyprus. So Cyprus problem would be solved once these two positions could be aligned, if it can be aligned. Otherwise, I don't see a real movement. What other things to propose? I can think on top of my head. I only can think of the educational things. But I used to remember on local levels. I used to remember there were festivals between small towns in Greece and Turkey, and the government, at least in Turkey, government was giving money to those things to sustain them, and they are not doing it anymore. So these festivals have died out. Why not sport tournaments? Like a Balkan Games. Why not we have Greek-Turkish games? Maybe we'll start killing each other there, but that's different. In the football game. But okay. Another idea: joint summer camps for 15 years old from both sides? Why don't you put them on an island, Greek or Turkish island, for three months in summer? They learn how to behave. Joint university education. I mean, you know, it's despite all the weaknesses and problems in Turkey, Turkish higher education system, I think it's much more advanced than the Greek one. I know the Greek system quite well and its problems as well. So why don't we combine it somehow? Now the government is talking to establish a Turkish government to establish a kind of a university between a couple of states. I don't know which states they're talking, but they're not talking Greece, for example. Why don't we have like a German-Turkish university we have here? Why don't we have Greek-Turkish university on the border area somewhere, you know, something like that? Teaching of language and literature with a program. You know, now in Istanbul, the Greek consulate is teaching Greek language for free, but that's in Istanbul. Now, how about in, you know, Edirne, Kars, Diyarbakir? Nobody does that. And same in Greece. So why don't the governments put some money on teaching of not only language, but literature? You know, Turkish literature or Greek literature to each other. Yeah. I mean, these are some things come to my mind just. Finally, I'm a great fan of institutions. I strongly believe institution building. If there is institution, it sustains itself by just being there. You know, even if people don't do anything anymore, these institutions will be there. The self-interest will be there, and it continues. That's why I'm worried this lack of institutions between, you know, on the rapprochement issue. It's very important. Otherwise, it would take just one defense minister who takes a Greek flag to go, you know, to an islet which was a wound, not healed, right? You know, it could just flare up, and I don't agree with the people that you know, so many things had happened and not bad things will happen again. That's a human fallacy. Bad things always happen. Look at the wars. You know, the World War I, second, third. You know.
3 points too. I mean, Sylvia, education, yes. Absolutely. All I was saying is, this is something you're dealing with, and I know many others are, but we need to focus on this. I was just saying that my focus would be on something else as well, simultaneously. That's all. We're totally in favor, so no misunderstanding. The CBMs, it's interesting. I can suggest others as well. I mean, especially even on Cyprus. It's one of the things I've been thinking about, but I've been trying to check it as to why it's not happening. Something the Republic of Cyprus could do is also declare Turkish as an official language to the EU. Very simple CBM. This is something that could possibly occur. I've raised it with some Greek Cypriots. No one has a proper answer as to why this has not happened. It doesn't mean anything. There are no strings attached. The official languages of the country are the two languages.
It costs money. That's why it didn't happen.
But still, as a CBM, it's there. Even if we do not at the stage of translating everything, make it an official language. Imagine the good mileage you will get in this part of the world. Okay, so there are things out there. Another one, it's interesting because this is also linked slightly to the question about, you asked about the new government, right? An agenda. I think they do. I mean, it's very interesting, this government. It's much maligned, and I will continue to fight it for what it's doing economically and socially to the country. Just I think Maria has been very vocal about it, and maybe Kostas too. On the other hand, it's very interesting in its approach to foreign policy issues. We keep talking about the foreign minister. We keep talking about the defense minister. Let's take the foreign minister. On one thing, I totally disagree with him, because I think he is part of that school that's trying to loosen the bonds of my country to the rest of Europe and the West. In that thing, I think he's wrong. On Greek-Turkish issues, and even Cyprus, he's a bit different in that sense. He comes from the Papandreou clan. He comes from Papandreou, George Papandreou, and what he's been doing in the ministry. He knows the issues. Even on Cyprus, he just mentioned a possible CBM, which was, he raised the issue. Huh? Let's get rid of the guarantor, Treaty of Guarantee. Maybe that's the problem. Or the forces, the military forces there, right? Of course, it's easier said than done, but he just said this. If we get rid of the troops, the Turkish troops and the Greek troops, that would be one way forward. It's interesting that this is a statement put out by the Greek official. On Greek-Turkish relations, I have a feeling that many people in his team are the same people, as I said, that have been working for, from what I can judge, and not that I have insight, that might have been working with George Papandreou in terms of leading forth the rapprochement process. From the beginning, there's been a tug of war between Syriza and independent Greeks as to who controls foreign policy. So we always talk about Kamenos and what he's done, but I think the Prime Ministry has been very clear, foreign policy is their purview. Don't try to do stupid things, even though the defense minister is tempted to do this. And obviously, Kodias is the Prime Minister's man, right? So in that sense, they've been very clear, A, about keeping the exploratory Turks. We deride them, but the talks are continuing. And I think more than anything, what this government is trying to do, given the context of where Greece is, give some normalcy back to the relationship. I mean, and I think that's why he's coming here. So let's keep the process going. They understand the benefits of tourism, of everything else. Not much change, but just a statement that, by the way, guys, we want to continue what we have been doing, even if it's not much. And so in that sense, it's not, right? I don't know, Kostas, if you agree, but in that sense, I do not see this government that's fundamentally changed its foreign policy vis-à-vis Turkey. And so this is where it stands. Last thing, I mean, your comments. I have a friend here, and I go out with him often, and he always tells me, he always says, Turkish friend, he says, I blame you Greeks. I say, why? I blame you Greeks for the state of my country. And I say, why? Because you Greeks left. Huh? Which, of course, yes, how can you stay? So very few of you have stayed. But it's interesting, the perception says, had you not, then we would not have been able to do things to the others, and so on. So it's always a very interesting discussion that we have. That's all I have to say. I mean, it's a very interesting concept, and it's something just to keep in mind.
Dimitri, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our panelists for their contributions, but also a special thank to Friedrich Naumann Foundation that made this conference possible. And I hope you found it as beneficial as I did, and that gave you some food for thought for future projects. The message I got here was that, like in the motto, it's economy stupid, it's the institutionalization. So, Herr Fleck, das ist Institutionalisierung. Have a very wonderful afternoon.
Dankeschön.